It is the Banner Baseball Show. Paul Mancano back here in Baltimore. Danielle Allentuck from the floor of her New York hotel room. Danielle, thanks for squeezing us in literally before the rubber match of this series between the Orioles and Yankees.
Of course, you always forget when you come to New York how small the hotel rooms are. So I am squeezed in like the little section between my bed and the wall, but we've got it. That's what the floor
Yeah,
is.
it sounds great. You've got the natural light coming in through the window. Everything is fine. I think if you can get through this weekend though, without getting hit by a pitch, then that is considered a success because the balls are flying around. The projectiles are coming at these hitters quite frequently.
Yeah, and I am an injury magnet, as most people know. So
Yeah,
if somebody's going to get a concussion or some kind of weird shoulder injury, it's probably going to be me. So
you can't afford another concussion,
I
Danielle.
know.
How many
Everyone.
concussions do you have on your resume?
Like three and a half.
A half concussion. Is that
Yeah.
diagnosed?
Self-diagnosed.
Okay.
Ran into a tree.
Gotcha. Well,
All
let's
good
hope you
though.
don't let's hope you don't end the weekend with another one as well. All right, Danielle, we got a lot to talk about on today's show. We're going to touch on the injury to Kyle Bradish and the fallout of the Orioles losing one of their better starting pitchers. We'll also talk about the news that Danny Coulombe could be out until September. But first, I promised people that I would read out a good review if they wrote one, and we got a good review from David Solove9489 on YouTube, who said, you have great knowledge, chemistry, and passion towards the O's and great vision of where we need to be and are headed. Well done. So if you write us a good review, I've shown you that I will read it out here on the show. Give us a like, a thumbs up anywhere that you are watching or listening. Could be watching us live on YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter. All right. Danielle, what a wild series the Orioles have had. It seems like they only have weird, entertaining series lately between the Phillies series and now the Yankees series, and now you've got the rubber match. What Cade Povich did last night was stealing the spotlight from Garrett Cole's return to the mound. 4 2/3 innings, only gave up 1 run, walked 5. Weird final line for Cade Povich, but I think it can't be overstated just how impressive he was against maybe the best lineup in all of baseball.
Not only a weird final line, an original final line in 2024, according to Jacob Calvin Meyer, the Sun, who did the stats next to me in the press box yesterday. He is the first player in history to have that exact stat line. So it was a really odd start, but I was very impressed with his composure. Those first 2 innings, I was kind of like, oh man, like 4 walks in his first two. His pitch count was climbing really high, and the bullpen had attacked the night before of Albert Suarez's short start, but he really reined it in. He said, he sat down with Drew French in between innings and just kind of really honed in on what he needed to do those last couple of innings. And he made it into the fifth, 4 2/3, I believe. Very impressive. Very impressive that he only gave up that 1 run despite not really having his command. So, I mean, I think we learned a lot about him last night and a lot about what he's capable of on a night when he doesn't have his best stuff.
Yeah, he kind of reminds me a little bit of Grayson Rodriguez at the start of the 2023 season when he first came up and he was showing flashes of brilliance and flashes of the pitcher that he was going to turn into, but it wasn't consistent. Some nights he would go out there and walk the first couple batters. He had a string, I think, of his first several starts where he would walk the first batter he faced. We saw similar command issues from Cade Povich, just missing his spots. Look, being thrown into that atmosphere at Yankee Stadium in your third big league start is incredibly difficult. And to be able to keep himself under control, keep his heart rate down. You saw him cursing to himself on the mound on the Masson broadcast. Adley Rutschman obviously having some sage advice for him as well. And being able to get through 4 2/3. I know that's not very deep, relatively speaking, but to give them that kind of start as a rookie was very helpful for Brandon Hyde.
Especially after 32 pitches in the first inning.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I was for
You
real
thought it
saying,
was going downhill very
what
quickly.
is the bullpen gonna do? They don't have that many guys available tonight. They don't have a long reliever, but just the fact that he was able to go that deep, let alone only give up 1 run, was just very impressive and a huge part of the reason why they were able to stay in that game last night.
Absolutely. Well, the Orioles do not have really a long reliever, and that's because they've had to use a lot of their long relievers in the rotation as of late, and that rotation just had another hit taken to it. was Kyle Bradish undergoing Tommy John surgery announced by Mike Elias yesterday. We figured it was not going to be good once Kyle Bradish hit the IL with a UCL sprain, and now his season is over and could miss half or all of the 2025 season. Danielle, I think the first question is, why did Kyle Bradish and why did the Orioles opt to go through the PRP, the platelet rich plasma injection, before the season started instead of Tommy John? That was a question that you asked Mike Elias. I know neither of us are doctors. I know Mike Elias is not a doctor, but he made it clear that at the time they thought it was the right decision to avoid Tommy John surgery, and they thought that they could get through at least this season without having to go that route, and it just wasn't meant to be.
Yeah, I'm actually pulling up exactly what he said because I've asked him this multiple times. I asked him this back in February when we first found out of spring training, and I asked him again yesterday when he announced that he would need a Tommy John. And what he said was when he first hurt his elbow back in January, February during the off season, of course, Tommy John came up. It's an elbow injury. He's a pitcher. It's 2024. You can't have a conversation about an elbow injury without that. But what they said is because of the particulars of his case and the sprain that he had then, it wasn't really necessary at the time. He responded to the PRP. It was recovering. It did do its job, but it was obviously just a Band-Aid and fixed the problem for a little bit, but it didn't solve the issue of the tear. So that's why he had ended up getting the Tommy John surgery. It is a reconstruction. It's going to be a long road back for him. He also had the internal brace added. And I think that they were really hopeful the PRP would be a Band-Aid for longer, but it wasn't. I mean, we've seen this with a couple pitchers. I covered a pitcher back in Colorado. Same as that case happened where he got the PRP shot, was able to be healthy for a month or two, and then ended up having to get Tommy John. I don't think you want to get the Tommy. I'm not a doctor either, but I've had PRP, and I think that you don't want to go the surgical route without trying the less invasive route first. I mean, that was my point of view when I did it. I think that was what Kyle wanted then too, but it was just inevitable.
Yeah, I think the thing that I picked up from Mike Elias's comments was that Kyle Bradish very much did not want to have Tommy John surgery unless it was absolutely necessary. And the organization empowers the players to make a lot of those decisions because it is the player himself who has to undergo the surgery and the recovery. And it's understandable from Kyle Bradish's perspective. You don't want to undergo that kind of serious reconstructive surgery unless you absolutely have to. With that PRP injection, essentially, in layman's terms, what you're doing is you're taking blood and injecting it into the area because the more blood flow there is to the site of the injury, the more your body can use that to heal itself. And that's what the Orioles were hoping. We've seen guys avoid Tommy John and be able to pitch through it, like you said, Danielle, but it's not incredibly common. And in this instance, the Orioles lost potentially several months of the 2025 season for Kyle Bradish by not having him undergo Tommy John surgery before the season. Because if he gets that done back in January, February, when the initial injury occurs, maybe there's a chance that he is on the opening day roster in 2025. That's now not a possibility. The recovery time frame is 12 to 18 months. He had an internal brace placed during this Tommy John surgery, so he's going to miss at least the first half of the 2025 season. And I think it's not out of the realm of possibility that he misses the entire 2025 season, which would be a major blow to the future of this rotation.
It would be. And, the same thing with Tyler Wells, where he's also missing opening day next year, is out for till about June 2. He only had his a couple weeks ago. So he could also miss all of next season. The thing with Tommy John surgery is that, it fixes the elbow, but it's still not a guarantee that the pitcher is even going to be able to come back. I mean, we saw John Means. It took him 18 months the first time to come back, and then he needed another Tommy John surgery this year as well. So nothing is guaranteed with these surgeries. It's a really long road back. But the Orioles I agree with what Kyle did, trying the non-invasive route, trying to see if he could make it to come back this year. But the Orioles now kind of find himself in a pickle for next year already. Kyle Bradish and Tyler Wells, they're not going to be back until next June at the earliest. John Means wouldn't be back to next June at the earliest, but is not under contract for next year. Corbin Burns will be a free agent after the season. We have no idea if, number one, Corbin is going to want to come back, and number two, if new ownership is going to put up the kind of money that Corbin will require to come back. So the Orioles kind of find themselves now where they're going to need some help to finish this year. They're really going to need help next year.
Yeah, I saw some chatter on social media about wanting to get an extension done with Corbin Burns now. Look, the Orioles have their it's almost definitely not going to happen. I'm not going to say it's impossible, but he's represented by Scott Boras, who Andy Koska just spoke to in a conversation that you can read on the BaltimoreBanner.com, or you can subscribe $1 for 6 months. But Scott Boras does not like to have his players, especially the big time, big name players, sign extensions before they hit free agency. This is an Orioles team also that is going to most likely head to the playoffs, be playing in meaningful games in September and October. If Corbin Burns is available and pitching well during a playoff run for the Orioles, that can only boost his value. The Orioles have their backs against the wall right now in terms of needing starters for 2025. All the leverage is on Corbin Burns and Scott Boras' side. So you would need to really shell out the cash even more than you normally would. And the guys who have signed extensions as Scott Boras clients have been with their teams for their entire careers. Jose Altuve is a career Astro. He signed an extension with his team. So you see it happen with Scott Boras clients, but it is very, very rare. And so I don't think anybody can consider a contract extension with Corbin Burns anything close to a done deal.
It's not even Scott Boras in this case. It's Corbin Burns has said many times since the day he was traded, he wants to be a free agent. He has earned out right. He's gotten to that point in his career. He wants to see all of his options before he makes a decision.
As he should. These players, it takes a long time to reach this point, and they want to be able to cash in, and they want to be able to choose where they go. They want to see what's out there for them. So you look at 2025, a lot of holes in this rotation right now, and it begs the question, as you wrote about on the BaltimoreBanner.com, the possibility that the Orioles could go out and acquire a starting pitcher at the deadline who has team control through 2025 at least. Because you can always sign pitchers in the offseason. You can always trade for pitchers in the offseason, but you get a little bit of that work done now by trading for a guy who is under team control through next season as well.
Yeah, I mean, their opening day rotation right now is Grayson Rodriguez, who we all think, has potential to be a number one eventually, maybe next year. And then you have Dean Kramer, Cole Irvin, Cade Povich. If you want to go farther, Chase McDermott. Those are your 5 starters. Yeah. That's all they have in the organization under contract for next year. So they are going to need help. Again, we don't know what new ownership is willing to do. They have the top prospects. You can go out and get a guy who is a year away from free agency at the deadline. You have a little bit of insurance for next year. You can never have too many starters. We've seen that in play this year, but they need to think about the present. They need to get through this year, but they also should start thinking about, okay, we have all these young, talented position players. We need the pitching to support them.
Yeah, and it's frustrating because you looked at this Orioles rotation, and at least for 2024, you said you feel so good about going into a playoff series with your 1, 2, 3, with Corbin Burns, Kyle Bradish, Grayson Rodriguez in some order. And now you lose one of the centerpieces of your rotation. I think you need to go out and get somebody not just who has team control through 2025, but you should probably get a game 3 starter. Corbin Burns is going to be your game 1 starter for a playoff rotation. I don't want to say that the Orioles are guaranteed to make the playoffs by any stretch, but they're certainly, the way that they have been playing and the way they've been playing against some of the better teams in all of baseball the last few days, they look like they're headed to the playoffs. You want to be able to feel good about 1, 2, and 3. You don't want to have Dean Kramer or Cole Irvin start game 3 of a playoff game unless you absolutely have to. So you need to go out and get somebody who you think can start a playoff game. I said not Jack Flaherty last week. I say not Jack Flaherty again this week. I know he's on a 1-year deal and he's pitching very well for Detroit. I don't think the Orioles are going to go down that route again. But I think that they need to go out and get somebody who has a higher ceiling than just a depth rotation piece to get them through the rest of the season.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote about this last night for the banner. They are no better off right now for the playoffs than they were a year ago. You have Corbin Burns. He essentially replaces Kyle Bradish as the game one starter. You have Grayson Rodriguez for game two and probably Dean Kramer for game three. They are exactly lining up as they did last year. And the depth pieces they have, Cade Povich, Cole Irvin, Albert Suarez, they've done really well stepping up into these higher stakes positions for them. But that's not who you want starting a playoff game if you can help it. They may be able to give them a couple innings, but you want a number two. You want a star. You want somebody out there who has experience in the playoffs, knows how to handle it, and can get them through.
Absolutely. All right, let's talk about Danny Coulombe because that creates a hole in the bullpen as well. Maybe flew under the radar because of the devastating news for Kyle Bradish yesterday. Danny Coulombe had bone chips removed from his elbow. So Mike Elias thinks that he can come back this season. He's hopeful that the lefty will be able to return this season, but he set the timeline at about September for a return, which would be great if he can come back and pitch for this team, and especially in a September baseball and October baseball. But it's hard to overstate just how good Danny Coulombe has been for the Orioles this year.
I mean, he's been one of the best left-handed relievers in all of baseball this year. I mean, he has been the guy the Orioles can rely on when they have men on base already. He's been great with inherited runners. He's been great in the eighth inning. He's just been fantastic for them all season. And I think with Danny Coulombe, there's kind of a ripple effect. He was a huge leader in that clubhouse. Cade Povich talked about it last night, that when he got up to the majors, it was Danny Coulombe who helped him out and made him feel welcome and calmed him down before that first start. He's losing that guy. The rest of the clubhouse is losing that guy. When a guy gets injured, they're not around the team as much. But you look at the game last night, you have Brian Baker did great, but he was pitching a spot that Danny Coulombe would have pitched. They had to go to Dylan Tate in the 10th inning, and he did fine. But Tate hasn't been great all of this year. So they really need the other relievers to stand up. And then on the other end of this, they already didn't have a lot of mobility in their bullpen. They don't have a lot of guy options. But they don't have a lot of people in AAA left to pull from. So they're going to need some reliever help. The only other options down there in Norfolk, Jonathan Heasley, who I'm pretty sure is on the injured list right now. Bauman. Bauman's gone. My apologies.
Was traded, really,
Bruce Zimmerman, I guess, could be a reliever, but they need some help. They need more depth there. And, I don't think with the bullpen that somebody else is going to get hurt. It may be just for 2 weeks, but I don't know who they would pull from at this point.
Yeah, you hope that when Dean Kramer returns, which hopefully he's going to return at some point over the coming weeks because he is now going to be pitching about 5 innings, 75 pitches down AAA Norfolk is what Mike Elias said from returning from that triceps injury. That's hope that you you put him back in the rotation. Maybe you bump Albert Suarez to the bullpen. Maybe you stick with a 6-man rotation. It would at least give you a little bit more room to maneuver, but it doesn't really solve all your problems.
I don't even know. I wouldn't bump anybody from this rotation because I don't think that they can afford to lose the legs out of any of their starters right now. If somebody else gets hurt and you have Albert Suarez in your bullpen for the next month, he's going to come back and be only able to throw 30 to 40 in his next start. So I don't know how they're going to handle that, but I would keep everybody in the rotation.
Yeah, I mean, they don't have an off day for the rest of the month. They have 10 more straight games. Their next off day is July 1st. Maybe this is a situation where they stick with the 6-man rotation and then they get to the All-Star break and they just clean slate. Let's figure this thing out because it has just been no rotation is built to withstand this many injuries. It's hard to put into context the fact that the Orioles have lost 3 starters to season-ending injuries and we're not even to the All-Star break. Usually you lose
16 days.
Yeah.
It wasn't even
they all undergo those surgeries.
It all happened this month.
Yeah. Usually rotations will lose 1 or 2 guys for the duration of the season to some kind of injury. To lose 3 before you're even at the halfway point of the season is unbelievable. But look, that is also baseball in the year 2024. Guys, starting pitchers are dropping left and right. Teams are dealing with this in every clubhouse, but it is just especially brutal for the Orioles right now. I still think, given this Danny Coulombe injury, even before the Danny Coulombe injury, I still think they need to go out and get another reliever. Craig Kimbrell last night blew the save for the Orioles. He, despite that performance, has been very good for the Orioles in the ninth inning as of late, but you'd like to have another high leverage reliever. And if Danny Coulombe does have to miss a couple months here, you need somebody to get you through some important situations before you even get to September, October.
And what are you going to do if/when Craig Kimbrell goes through another rough patch? I mean, we
Sure.
started earlier this year. What was that? Early May, and it was Danny Coulombe who stepped up big then. Who's the guy who steps up now if that happens
Right.
again? And
I,
with Kimbrell's history, it's pretty likely it's going to happen again. You bump Cano up, but then who takes Cano's spot? They don't have a lot of options right now.
Yeah, I think the one thing, if I were to project into the future here, into September, October, when you look at a playoff roster, I think one positive that you can look at is I think Cade Povich has shown that he can pitch in the big leagues. Maybe he slides into a DL Hall type lefty reliever role when it comes down to the critical games, when he is not required to start games, when you have maybe an extra, starter in there that you trade for, you're getting into playoff games where you're down to a 3 or 4 man rotation. Cade Povich maybe could be a nice lefty reliever, but that is a ways away. You still need him to start games in the meantime.
Also, I mean, maybe, but Cade has never done that role before.
Sure. Yeah, he's
Do you
been a
throw
starter.
him in when the stakes are highest and just hope he can swim in a
Yeah.
role he's never done before? I mean, that would be pretty gutsy of the Orioles. It'd be great if it worked out, but I'm not so sure he's the same level as DL Hall was at being able to adjust to a different spot like that.
Yeah, his stuff is not as good as DL Hall's as well. His DL Hall has better pure stuff,
Mhm.
more velocity that he could tap into as a back end of the bullpen reliever, and we're seeing it, in Milwaukee with him as a starter. But this rotation needs help. This bullpen needs help, and you also worry about the fact that we're not even at the halfway point. You could lose other guys before
Right.
the end of the season. Knock on wood. Hopefully you don't. But
Yeah.
you got to prepare for every eventuality, and you got to get as many arms in the building as possible in order to prepare for a key stretch run.
Even if it's just for the minimum 15 days.
Yeah.
I don't think they could survive even that at this point.
Yeah. I think you're also seeing the results of the Orioles drafting as many position players as they
Mhm.
have since Mike Elias joined the organization. In 2019, the first pitcher that they took in the draft wasn't until the 8th round. That was Griffin McLarty, who I don't think is in the organization anymore. 2020, they only took one pitcher in that shortened draft. That was in the 5th round. That was Carter Baumler, who ended up having his own Tommy John surgery. 2021 was Carlos Tavera in the 5th round. 2022 was Nolan McLean in the 3rd round, who's a two-way player, and he didn't even sign. And then Jackson Baumeister last year became the highest drafted pitcher of the Elias era in the competitive balance B round last year. So we know that Mike Elias does not like to draft pitchers high in the draft. He has been arguably the best GM in baseball at drafting since he came to Baltimore. And almost all of his position players that he has drafted highly have hit. But now you're starting to see the depletion of pitchers in the organization at the higher levels that he has drafted. He trades for a lot of guys. That's how he got Yennier Cano. That's how he got Cade Povich, came over in the Jorge Lopez trade. Kyle Bradish came over in the Dylan Bundy trade a couple years ago. So he acquires them through other means. But we're now seeing that the Orioles not drafting pitchers high over the last several years might be coming back to haunt them.
And it will only haunt them if they're not willing to trade some of those, high caliber position players they drafted for more pitching.
Right.
They need to keep doing that. In the past, they could get away with, getting a guy who's a year or two away from the majors. But last year at the deadline, they got Shintaro Fujinami and Jack Flaherty. Neither trade really helped the Orioles at all. So this year, they need to go a little higher. They did great with Corbin Burns. That was a big hit. They need to be willing to part with somebody to win this year and next year.
Yeah. And the talent that they have in this system has to turn into big leaguers at some point because There are too many guys that have their path blocked to the big leagues. I think
Good.
it's still very likely that Connor Norby ends up being a guy that is traded at this deadline because he has shown he can play in the big leagues. He continues to, hit the cover off the ball in AAA. He can play multiple positions. He is 23, 24. He is ready to be a big leaguer, similar to Joey Ortiz at this point last year. But there are other guys that if the Orioles really want to try to swing for a splashy big time starter like Garrett Crochet in Chicago, they might have to include somebody like Heston Kjerstad or Kobe Mayo. Or Samuel Basallo. These are top 50 prospects. Joey Ortiz was the top 100 prospect, and I know it really hurt the Orioles to deal him for Corbin Burns, but it would hurt a whole lot more to deal somebody like Kobe Mayo, who I think this team still views as their long-term third baseman of the future, or Heston Kjerstad, who they think can hit 30, 40 homers at the big league level this season. They might have to include one of these guys if they want to get a true starter who can start playoff games.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a couple of rumors already about Samuel Basallo, the Orioles being willing to part with him. They have Adley. They have their starting catcher under control for a couple more years. I think that they could probably easily sign James McCann for another year or two. He's been a great backup catcher for them. I could see them maybe willing to part with him. But they love the guy, they love his potential. He could be a great DH. His defense is coming along. He's only 19. So, I mean, he hasn't really even tapped into his potential yet. I don't see them being willing to part with Heston Kjerstad or Kobe Mayo. I think Heston Kjerstad has a pretty clear path to getting daily playing time once Anthony Santander becomes a free agent. I don't necessarily see them re-signing him. I think Kobe Mayo, when he's ready, could slot in at third base, kind of the starting guy over there. Ramon Urias and Jorge Mateo only have a couple more years left to team control themselves, and Kobe Mayo is 22, I think, maybe 21. He's still pretty young.
He's 22, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that they see a lot of upside in him for the future, but they're going to have to be willing to part with a Connor Norby, a Kyle Stowers, some of their lower down top prospects, if they really want to make an impact this year.
Yeah, you just wonder if that'll be enough. If teams get especially greedy around the trade deadline, and they're going to be asking the Orioles about Kjerstad, about Mayo, about Basallo. And given the number of injuries that teams have sustained to their starting rotations around baseball, the Orioles might not be able to swing a deal with somebody like Stowers or Norby. And whether they end up dealing one of their top 50 prospects is going to be a huge, huge question. And it's going to be something that we're going to be watching very closely over the next month. I think that Mike Elias is going to be awfully careful, but when push comes to shove, is he going to be willing to deal one of these guys?
On the other side of this, Orioles are probably going to have to be willing to take on a large contract and increase their payroll by 10 to 15 million potentially if they're going to try and get one of these top guys, especially if it's a guy who's already a free agent and not just somebody who was in their final year of team control. So Rubenstein has said he's willing to do whatever he can for the team, but we haven't actually had to see that in action yet. He hasn't been tested yet, and this is kind of his first big test, is this trade deadline.
Absolutely. Well, Mike Elias did address it yesterday, and he said, we're just going to do our job, and it's hard to project a month and a half into the future exactly who is going to be buyers, who's going to be sellers, who's going to be available, and what the asking prices will be. But it's clear they need to do something. They need to add to this rotation. They need to add to this bullpen if they want to be able to get through 162 and hopefully make an October push. Danielle, after this game, what is the plan? You are working through the weekend, right?
I am. I head to Houston tomorrow for the Astros aren't great, but it's always a big 3-game series down there in Texas. So
the homecoming for Mike Elias.
And Sig Mejdal, who's also on this trip. They're all going to get to go home. It's also, I learned yesterday, a homecoming for Albert Suarez, whose family lives in Houston. Oh. So he'll get to have his kids with him for this trip.
Very nice. Well, you will have complete coverage on the BaltimoreBanner.com and at @D_Allentuck on Twitter. I'm at Paul Mancano and at All Banner Sports. Please like, rate, review, subscribe. Tell your friends about the Banner Baseball Show. Thanks so much for tuning in. For Danielle Allentuck